Welcome back to Channel 514 and SPK Plus on this lovely day in the month of August, at the very beginning of the month of August. And what we're going to be doing today is the third installment, the third episode in our series Exploring Ancient Literature. And this one I'm probably going to call something like Exploring Ancient Literature, Mesopotamia, the Gods, because the handful of texts that we're going to be discussing are texts that tell mythological stories about the different gods in the Mesopotamian pantheon. And when I say pantheon, I don't necessarily mean a very canonical list or panoply or gallery of ancient gods, because, as you might know or you might have heard, each city-state in Mesopotamia and each kingdom, each powerful empire, had its own one or two or several patrons, special patron gods. Sometimes it would be a god or a goddess, so it could be male or female, and they were seen as having a special care or concern or for the particular city or kingdom where they were worshipped, or that city or kingdom was seen as being the favorite of this particular god. And oftentimes they really are similar to each other. So in one city you might have this fertility goddess, and in another city you would have a very similar fertility goddess, and they might tell kind of the same stories about her, and she might be part of a much broader tradition, but in a sense she was seen as being uniquely concerned with this particular city or kingdom. And so the first of these that I wanted to talk about figures in our first story that we're going to be reading, which is The Descent of Ishtar. And like the others that we've read so far, I'm taking it from this book, Myths from Mesopotamia, translated by Stephanie Dalley in the Oxford World's Classics series. And this was published in 1989 and then again in 2000. And actually, I looked it up on Amazon, and there's a new edition from 2009, because Oxford World's Classics has been re-released in new editions that they look different from this one. I'll show you an example of what they look like now. Here's one now. So you can see it's just a different cover. The style is different, the way it's printed. This is by Cicero, so it has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. But that's how they're looking right now. So when you see this one in the '09 edition, it's got this same cover art, which is an illustration of the god Ninurta attacking Anzu. Actually, I'll talk about that a little bit later, the Epic of Anzu. It's not the most important or a noteworthy story, and it's quite similar in some ways to the part in Enuma Elish where the god Marduk is attacking these primordial monsters. So we'll just run over that briefly later. But first I wanted to talk about The Descent of Ishtar. Now Ishtar, it's the name of a movie that I haven't seen, but it's famous for being a really bad movie, but came out a long time ago. But actually, the name refers to one of these fertility goddesses in Mesopotamia and the ancient Near East. And you find goddesses similar to her in other cultures, like in the Phoenician and Canaanite cultures, they had Astarte, or in Anatolia, they had Cybele, Kubele. You can pronounce that in a lot of different ways. And they all tended to be pretty similar. And in the Sumerian culture, the very earliest great civilization in Mesopotamia, she was called Inanna. And here is a statue, a very old image made of terracotta of Ishtar or Inanna from Sumerian times. hold that up really close there. You can see, of course, she's a fertility goddess, so everything is very exaggerated in this figurine. But, and that's in the Louvre, actually. And this book that I just am showing this to you in, it's falling apart because I've had it since I was probably 12 or so, but it's the Larousse Encyclopedia of Mythology, published, this edition is published by Barnes & Noble. And it goes through a whole host of different sections of dealing with the mythology from different parts of the world. And it's very well illustrated. But that's all I wanted to show you from there, for now. I'll probably come up with something from there to show you later. But, like I said, in each city-state, they had their own temple, their own complex of religious buildings, and buildings that were associated with the temple, and that was a major part of the city. And so, almost like a citadel of the city. And so, here's an artist's rendering of what that might look like in a Mesopotamian city-state. So you can see there in the middle is the temple, and with the steps leading up to it and everything. And then there are different courtyards and different ring walls, different enclosures. And it's all part of, and it's a compartment. There are different compartments within the walls, and so these are all used for different purposes. Like they would have pasture land, and they would have storage space, and there would be all kinds of different people working there and living there, either taking care of the animals or doing more practical work or taking part in worship in different capacities, singing or keeping records and all kinds of things. And so that was a very important part of a Mesopotamian city, and here we have a photograph of the famous Ziggurat at Ur. And a ziggurat is one of these big, tall temple mound things, and so you can see it's got very high walls, and it's in ruins today, so it's in a dilapidated state, but you can still kind of make out the basic concept. This very high structure with a big platform and a long, dramatic staircase leading up. So Ishtar and the Mesopotamian gods would have had their cult centers in places like that. And again, that's Daniel C. Snell, Life in the Ancient Near East. We're using this one in this series fairly often for its illustrations. And it actually doesn't have many illustrations, but the few that it does have suit our purpose here. And here's another illustration of Ishtar. It's just a drawing, probably based on some statue or figurine somewhere, but this is in a book for young readers from the Kingfisher publisher, Goddesses, Heroes, and Shamans, The Young People's Guide to World Mythology. And I've had this one since I was pretty young too. But here's an image of how they would depict Ishtar, or a goddess like her. So you can see she's associated with fertility, but also with war and battle and all that sort of thing. She's shown with weapons sometimes. She's got a lion, sometimes in a chariot, pulled by lions or something like that. So fertility and battle are two of the important things associated with her. And that's pretty common in the ancient Near East with these important goddesses. So in this story, The Descent of Ishtar, she has a male consort called Dumuzi or Tammuz, and he is killed and he goes down to the underworld. Even though he's thought of as being divine, he can still be killed and go down to the underworld. And so she goes down there to find him, and the goddess who is ruling over the underworld, she's called Ereshkigal, and she doesn't want to let Ishtar in, but she's prevailed upon to do so. And so Ishtar is escorted through different stages into the underworld by this character called the Gatekeeper. And she has to give up all her adornments and ultimately clothing and everything to cross to the other side, to get into this place. which normally no one, of course, normally no one who's alive or a living god or goddess or a human, they can't go there. So it's a big, sacrifice kind of for her to go there. And that's really what the story is about. And it's less of a story, really, than kind of a liturgical or ritual text. And there's a theory that probably it was read in stages during a ceremony where they would take the image of the goddess from one town to another, from a particular one place to another. So the beginning of the journey would kind of be like she's kind of in her heavenly place, and then ultimately she goes down to the underworld, and that's kind of the end of the journey. So that's a kind of a common theme with these goddesses in the ancient Near East. They have some male lover or consort, and he dies, and maybe he's connected with fertility and the seasons, the changes of the seasons in some way, and so he dies year by year, each year, and comes back, and she has a period where she's mourning over him, and so in the worship of the god and the goddess, there's a stage where the goddess is mourning over the god, and he's gone, and she wants him back, and eventually he comes back. So that's the Descent of Ishtar. Now, another one that I want to mention, and this story, I actually looked for it on sacredtexts.com or the Internet Sacred Text Archive, and for some reason I didn't find it there, but I really thought I would. But they do have a good section of texts from the ancient Near East for anyone who's interested, and some that I'm not going to bother with here because they're not very literary, and so I don't think we really need to go out of our way to treat them. But this next one is called Nergal and Ereshkigal, and maybe I'll write these names down on the marker board. I wish I had somewhere convenient to set that. I'll have to set up something. But this character Nergal, that's a male god, and Ereshkigal, as I mentioned earlier, is female, and she rules over the land of the dead. And so in this story, Nergal and Ereshkigal, Nergal comes down to the underworld, and for some reason he takes over and forces her to accept him as her consort. So then you have two rulers of the underworld, I guess. You have a god and a goddess. And Nergal, the male of the pair, is also associated with disease, and so perhaps that's why at some point he came to be thought of as having a place in the underworld ruling over the dead, because you get sick and you die. So another text in here that's pretty much the same as Nergal and Ereshkigal is called Erra and Ishum. The only real difference there, or the major difference, is that Nergal is called Erra, and Ereshkigal is called Ishum for some reason. Let's see. So rather than spend too much time talking about that one, I'll move on. And there's just two more really in here that we should talk about. There's one very short piece of writing they call the Theogony of Dunnu, because it apparently comes from a town called Dunnu, and it's probably to be dated to the early 2nd millennium BC, and it has to do with struggles and movements among the gods at the very beginning of things, kind of like you find in Enuma Elish or in Atrahasis, which we discussed in our first and second episodes of this series. So just to give a small example of that, together they, the gods, built Dunnu forever as his refuge. Plough made unrestricted dominion for himself in Dunnu. Then Earth raised her face to the cattle god his son, and said to him, "Come and let me love you." The cattle god married Earth his mother, and killed Plow his father. So they have these kind of symbolic names, and they're battling each other and marrying each other and all that sort of thing. And in the process, forming our world from its early primitive disordered state. And the only other one that I think we'll mention is known as the Epic of Anzu. And if you remember in our previous episode about Enuma Elish, what happens in the middle of that story is that the gods want to conquer and take over from these primordial monsters who are individually more powerful than the individual gods, but are of course monsters and very frightening and unreasoning and not disposed to be at peace with the gods who have come into being in their midst in some way. So what happens then? Marduk, the god of the city of Babylon, becomes the champion of the gods, and he defeats the female of this family of monsters, and her consort, who is then killed, and his body is used to make humanity. So in this version, and I should mention that the consort, who is used and sacrificed in order to make humanity, he has these things called the Tablets of Destiny. Sometimes I've seen them called the Tablets of Fate, but anyway. Somehow these make him more powerful, and the gods want to have this for themselves, have these tablets for themselves, so that they can have the supreme power in the universe. And in this story, Anzu, A-N-Z-U, there's a creature who is kind of part lion and part bird. I think I have a picture in this book. But what he has the Tablets of Destiny. Apparently he's stolen them from the gods, and they need a champion to get the tablets back. So what happens is the god Ninurta, he goes and is able to kill the bird, the monster. Here's a picture of that. So you can see that's like a watercolor or a drawing. He's shooting an arrow at it. It says in the caption that the arrow is tipped with poison. So he defeats the monster, and obviously he's in the place of Marduk in this story, so he's the heroic warrior champion of the gods. And so it's a similar story, really, with the same purpose, to celebrate a particular god who represents valor and heroism and civilization and order, and he's conquering a monstrous, chaotic being and restoring order and saving the universe and etc. So that's basically, those are basically some of the more important Mesopotamian classics dealing with the pantheon, if you want to call it that, of gods. So you've got the Descent of Ishtar, you've got Nergal and Ereshkigal, or Erra and Ishum, you've got the Epic of Anzu, the Theogony of Dunnu, and I think that's it. So I put all those together into just this one video because it's easier to describe them all in brief than it would be to do the same with Atrahasis or Enuma Elish. So I thought I would get those two more important and more substantial texts out of the way, and then lump all these lesser ones together into one presentation. So as far as I can tell, we've kind of been over everything we need to go over for those. And so our next one, which I'm going to get right onto probably as soon as I finish this one, is about certain heroic people. So we're done with the gods, and then we'll talk about the heroes, essentially. And after that, we'll do one on the Gilgamesh tradition. So thanks for joining us, and we'll be right back. And please keep on visiting, and I hope you're enjoying this. Have a nice day.